Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details. Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Welcome to the World Martial Arts television show. You're going to have to indulge me a little bit here. This is a gentleman that I used to read about back in the day when I was a callow youth. It's Sensei Steve Rowe, just going to help you here. But Steve used to write these wonderful articles in magazines where people were still doing stuff like, would a roundhouse kick work outside of a chip shop? And you used to come out with some like just amazing, thought-provoking articles. And I'm just so happy to get you. I know that's a really long-winded intro, but the thing is, Steve, you're not exactly your average martial artist. We're going to start, if you don't mind, right? And it's a cliche of mine, but we are going to start at the beginning, just so that if people don't know who you are, just tell us a little bit about how you got into martial arts, first of all.
My brother was the first person to start. He started in the 60s, and he trained in those days with Tatsu Suzuki in Wadaroo. He trained with Chu King Hung in Tai Chi. He did a little bit of training with Steve Morris. And so he was training around in the 60s to the 70s. Then he went with George Andrews at the Marble Factory in Walworth Road. I was kind of almost separated from my family when I was quite young, in my kind of very late teens. So I was always intrigued by karate. I was always intrigued by I guess, the Japanese writing as well. So I got involved I was in the London Fire Brigade. I left that. I got involved into security. So I kind of found, if you like, a quite self-defense oriented karate club at the time in South London, which at the time, the first one I trained at was part of John Alexander's Zen Shinryu group, if you...
Wow, yeah.
But we broke away from that quite quickly, and I was training under a guy called Jim Fewins. And because I worked in security, I wasn't really interested in kata or anything like that. It was just violence and fighting, the usual stuff that we had in those days. I had a lot of injuries. I had my nose reset a while back, and they found 5 breaks in my nose. I, cracked cheekbones, loads of broken ribs, all the usual injuries that we had in those days. Yeah. It was that kind of start. But it was really, I think, when David Carradine came on in 1973 in Kung Fu, that was the thing that really attracted me. And I think because I'd grown up in South London, I didn't really go to school much. I didn't pass any exams. Everyone kind of thought I was just young and violent and ignorant. And in those days, yeah, I was, which is kind of how I fell into the security trade, really. But when I saw that, I kind of knew that I was a very angry person. I was quite violent. I dealt with everything with my fists. My family had done, my friends did. Yeah, in my first karate club, if you didn't like someone, you just hit them. It was that kind of environment. But I knew that I'd end up in prison if I carried on as I was. When I saw David Carradine and the whole Buddhist thing, I knew that's what I needed. There was something inside me that just clicked. So 73, I think it was, I went to find my first Tai Chi club and started training in Tai Chi.
Well, do you know what? It's interesting because as you're saying this, right? Obviously, I've been reading about you since the mid-'80s, yeah? So the two things that you came out with, first of all, was for you now to tell me, it's a bit like finding out that Santa isn't real, because for you to turn around and say to me that you left school with no qualifications, I've always considered you to be like, at the very least, don't know, like a BA or something, because you were so well. I know, I do mean that.
I get it.
Again, because I'm like, the thing is, I'm coming from a generation where you got to remember, Steve. I read about you before I ever heard your voice. I know this sounds really bizarre, but it was like you build up this mental picture in your head of what the person's going to be like, and then for you to say that now, I'm thinking, oh man, yes, because I'm a bit of an autodidact. I did well at school, but then I wanted to go and I want to go to university. No one in my family went to university, So it's like, who do you think you are? You're going to go to uni, and now everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to do a degree in ceramics. You know what I mean? I don't know what that's all about, but you understand what I mean. So to find that out got me. And then just as you were saying it, I meant to say, because at the top of the show, I wanted to say this, sending his regards as always to you is like, this is how crazy this martial arts world works. My BJJ professor, Neil Simpkin, one of your students.
Oh, Neil.
Neil, because he trained with you for years and years. And
he did.
It was literally as we were doing it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Neil said, make sure you say hello to him, But the thing that I wanted to ask you about here is, like, to my shame, I've always just saw you as a karateka, and then I thought that you actually went into Tai Chi later, without sounding like the cliche, the guy does karate for years and then gets to 50 and then goes, can't bash people anymore. Maybe there was something wrong with me when I wanted to bash someone. Now I'm getting the yin to the yang. But like, this is from day one, really, with you, that you were into Tai Chi as well as karate. Yeah,
I think it'd be fair to say certainly by 1976, I think I was about a second dan in karate at the time, that I took up Tai Chi because I realized that's what I needed. And I've got to say, I found it really hard, to go from a club where we would just fight all the time to being able to stand out in a garden and do all these really slow movements. It was killing me. But I knew that's what I needed. I knew that's what I lacked. And every time Kung Fu came on the telly and they'd go to the Shaolin Temple, there was something inside of me that was going, this is what you need. And going back to Scott, I didn't do well at school. All my family thought I was an idiot. Everybody thought I was an idiot. I thought I was an idiot because that's what I was indoctrinated with. If anyone was going to mess something up, it was going to be Steve. If anyone was going to do something wrong, it was going to be me. I fell in with the sort of South London street crowds. And so everything was just violence, really. It was just kind of around you most of the time. And but when I went to my Tai Chi classes, my first Tai Chi instructor was a guy called Simon Wired. And he gave me my first copy of the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I'd never read a book up until then. So,
wow.
I got this book. I was 26, something like that. So I opened this book, and when I started reading it, it just clicked with me. I understood everything in it. Since then, I've given it to loads of people and said, oh, you should read this. And they go, I don't understand it. I have classes here where I interpret Lao Tzu to the people here, but I understood it straight away because it's just what I needed. And sort of just to finish it off fairly quickly, a good few years ago now, I took a Mensa test and I was in the top 1%. I think I scored 168 or something. So I was obviously highly intelligent, but my brain works very differently to most other people. I'd say that I'm neurologically diverse. I see everything different to everybody else, which you can probably tell by the stuff that I put up on post.
But you see, the thing. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but Steve, every great teacher I've ever met's been like that. This is like one of my, like, Michelangelo is one of my fate. Like, he's a hero of mine. There's two people in the world I'd love to have met: Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. I fancy myself as a bit of a Renaissance man. The beauty of getting into my 50s now is I can read philosophy and stoicism and not look like I'm full of shit. Because I'm reading it now and I go, no, I get this now. So, you know, I use this line all the time. When you're younger, you read Hemingway and you go, yeah, I understand what he means. And then when you get older, you know, understand Hemingway. I fucking am Hemingway. You know, that's the point where you go, yeah, I understand. I got more years behind me than in front of me. And the thing about the neurodiversity thing is, that's nearly every martial artist I've ever met as well. Why the hell would you 10,000 punches into fresh air? Yeah, you're hyperextending your elbow. Why? You'll be a better puncher. Well, hit the pad twice. We'll find out if you're any good. And it's very interesting because years ago we'd have seen that as maybe not a disability, but it would certainly be something to hold us back. But now, Steve, when you look at it now, it's going, no, I've got a different way of approaching this. You know, that's the thing about being an educator, right? So, if you can tell me, so at what point did you start to? As I said, with me, I've always been a huge fan of your writing. You know, that's the thing. Not just the, you know, when you did the Samurai on the Door stuff with Dennis, I really enjoyed that. But some of the early stuff that you did, and I'm going to have to add a bit of a caveat with this one, right? Years ago, do you remember there was that period in karate, especially where I think you were the guy that I actually heard first say this, where you spent more time in a blazer than you did in a gi. I think you were giving somebody a hard time about karate politics. And you're like, I see the guy in the blazer all the time, but I haven't seen him in a gi for the last year and a half. And I think it was you who said that. And I've kept all the magazines, so I know it. But at what point did you, for want of a better phrase, want to be seen as more of a mover and a shaker to try and, because you did bring a lot of stuff together, like the political side of stuff, because at that point it was anybody could go, they still can go to a church hall, hire it, teach, right? But you tried to bring a more formulaic approach to an association. So how old were you when you brought that in?
Yeah, I because I was with Toru Takamizawa, and God, it's a long story, but to try and cut it as briefly as possible, Toru was being a lot of the people around him at the time weren't looking after him, and he got himself into a lot of trouble, a lot of financial trouble. A lot of people around him were getting very rich, and he was getting very poor. And so that was when we had Terra Karate. It was a limited company, and he was signing checkbooks and just giving them to people. He didn't really understand money. He didn't know how to deal with it. I was his private student, so I looked at it, and he was about to lose his house. He was about to be put in prison at the time for money he owed the tax man, and so on. I found him a good lawyer. I found him a good accountant. I sold his house up there, bought him a house down here, opened some clubs for him, got him to resign out of Terra, and we formed the Takamizawa Institute of Karate. And I made sure that all of the money went straight to his letterbox, so people had just sent it directly to him. And kind of set all that up for him. But he asked me to represent him on the governing body. So I got the Takamizawa Institute into the governing body of karate at the time, and kind of rose up from being on the executive committee, and then on the secretary, then to chairman. So I became chairman of the governing body for karate at the time. But the problem we had, everyone was saying at the time, competition is the shop window of karate, was the saying. And I was the one who put my hand up and said, absolutely no one comes to my club to learn competition karate. They all come because they've watched a Bruce Lee movie, or they've watched David Carradine in Kung Fu. And it was that I thought to myself, yeah, I've got to at least put the traditional aspects forward. So that was then why I started writing for combat, and then traditional karate, and then eventually martial arts illustrated, and so on. So the writing really came about. I wanted to offer a completely different viewpoint than the one that was prevalent at the time. I had loads of enemies there at the time because nobody liked, they all had their own niche there, didn't they? The whole tournament thing. So they didn't like me. And I think actually when they put me in as chairman, it was to get rid of me, but it didn't work. And that was kind of how that came about. But and I tried to structure it. We tried to put together all the coaching programs, things that people could use in their normal dojo that was other than competition, all that kind of stuff. I wanted to get referees properly qualified. I wanted fighters to have medical records and lists of what happened to them in tournaments and competition, all that kind of stuff, which most of it was very unpopular at the time with that particular group. So I tried to structure it. And then I realized one day, I was lucky really, because Chris Ryan was a very good friend of mine. And so Chris became the secretary. And we actually ran the offices out of his dojo in Old Street. Jeff Thompson, the fighter, was also a very good friend of mine. Yeah. And so Jeff helped out a lot of the time as well. But you kind of realize in the end, you just can't win. It was the wrong environment for me. And I realized that I would function much better outside of politics. And that was where that kind of came from, I think.
Well, it's funny you said that, Steve, because
so the answer is to get in the dojo and train and talk and discuss martial arts, you know.
It's quite funny. It's quite funny you said that, because as you're saying this, it's taken me back a little bit, because I remember being around all that, and I remember terror. I remember going to the temple in Birmingham and getting kicked down the stairs, walking in there, and then getting put through. Eddie Daniels had his place across the road by the car park. He had that going on, and because I could never work it out, because I said this to Neil Simpkin a few times. When the Brazilians first came over, I said to Neil, I said, it's going to be the same. I said, we're going to have another Toru here, mate. And it was like, we're going to have another Inoue Sensei. And you go, what? And you go, yeah, because within about 5 to 10 years, because it's the British mentality, right, we've got what we need now. Now we're going to do this. And it was like, as you were saying, it's funny, because it was like, there was a movement at the time. As I said, when you were saying about bringing a different approach to karate, I know you already know this, but trust me, you did, because you were the first guy. As I said, I always saw you as a very cerebral character anyway, you know what I mean? Just by reading the magazines. And it was like you mentioned, like I used to always wind up Jeff Thompson in Coventry, because I always say there was the black Jeff Thompson and the white Jeff Thompson. And I used to say to Jeff, I said, you've got to remember, at the moment, people still think you're going to be there with Pat Mackay doing Pursuit of Excellence book. And then it was like, then Jeff went this way. But at that time, that was when Jeff Thompson was going, right, we need to be in the Olympics. We've got this all going on. But like they're looking at us like a bunch of amateurs. And, not to mention any names, but I remember going to like the Northern Open, where there was big brown paper bags full of money, and there'd be like this poster with fantastic trophies to be won. And people were paying 25 quid in the 80s to compete in tournaments, to win a trophy that you could get from Timpson's for maybe about 40 quid. There'd be 30 people in the category. And it was all like, and for want of a better word, it was like almost like the equivalent of Goodfellas, because you'd see there was like crew of lads together. And like, as you said, it wouldn't be very popular, because they'd be like, no, they didn't even want to pay tax. I went to a competition once, and I was like, why is there no posters up? Yeah, we don't want a taxman to know about this one. And I'm like, there's 1,200 people in the room, mate. Someone's going to find out. You try and explain that to people about the Wild West, they wouldn't do it. So if you don't mind, Steve, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it a little bit forward. So the next time that you actually came up on my radar, following you, was, you had Sheik on, that was going really well, and then you were moving more to Tai Chi, and then and I mean this in the nicest possible way, bizarrely, a load of pictures turn up, and it's like, is this an advert for the Czech tourist board? And then because you were doing some camps, is it Jezerka? Was it you were calling?
That's right.
Yeah. And it came up, and it was like, again, I was much younger than I am now, and I was looking at it, I was being a bit of a mug, like, because I was like, what? And then I'm looking at it, I'm going, no, that's exactly what I'd want. I don't want to go on a karate course to Bridlington, where it's like 2 hours of training and then being on the steam for the rest of it. If I'm going to go somewhere nice in this tranquil environment. And as you're saying it, it's like the old, the David Carradine thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, Czechoslovakia, Tai Chi, martial arts, who'd put that together? And then you see it and you go, it is pretty zen, man, because the pictures were lovely. So how did you get yourself over there?
It was a beautiful place. Yeah. I had to form my association, Shikon, because myself and Toro have always been good friends, but the people that were around him didn't like me. So for him to keep those, I had to leave, if you like. So I formed Shikon at the time. Akimitsu Fuji was my Iaido instructor, and he gave us the name. He named the association. He drew the calligraphy and so on. And we formed, because Jeff Thompson there as well, and Ian Cuthbert was the squad coach as well. Yeah. So we had an invitation. They just had the revolution in the Czech Republic. The Berlin Wall had recently come down, and we got an invitation to go to the Czech Open, their first international tournament. So I went along with the team, with the squad at the time, and I met Ojan Musel there, who was the guy who arranged it. He was one of the few people at the time that spoke our language and so on. So he said to me, will you come over and do a seminar? So I said, yeah, okay. What I didn't realise when he said come over and do a seminar was that I was going to be teaching the president's bodyguards, their police, their special forces, and that he was, at the time, he was the police self-defence instructor. So they'd been training in karate with Ochi in Germany. So when we got halfway through the course and they come up to me and said, what you do is far more effective. I'm bearing in mind, I've been working in the security trade and so on. So your self-defense stuff is far more effective than anything that we've learned anywhere else. Will you become the chief instructor and come over on a regular basis and teach the police and president's bodyguards and so on? So that's how the relationship started. And 33, 4 years later, I'm still going over there. And so we had the summer camps up in the mountains. Now, who is my representative over there. He was also the squad coach for the Czech team for all of those years. And his son and daughter have grown up with me around them as well. And Robert, his son, was world champion. And so we've established quite a strong relationship and a very powerful group over there. And actually, it was the Czech government that awarded me my 9th Dan for services rendered. Yeah, because I took the Aikido instructors over there. And of course, in Aikido now they use Joe Tambu, Robert. I forgot his other name. It's terrible, isn't it? But and I took over the Iaido instructors. I took Big Cook over there. So Iaido, Aikido, Tai Chi, Karate all came via me. So Robert Mustard, thank you, Will. Just saw what you put up there. I should. Robert would kill me for that, but yeah. So we all of the martial arts over there were kind of established through me. So Czech national television. Every time I go over, they would do interviews and come and show the summer camp and so on. So I actually became quite well known over there. But I was teaching. I taught in Norway for 16 years, Sweden, Denmark, Portugal, loads of different places.
Well, yeah, this is the thing, right? When it first came up, it was my instructor. You might remember him, a guy called Andy Margaret. He was from Coventry. He was he's a lovely bloke. Still see him to this day. He's a great old boy. And he went over to Czechoslovakia with, you might remember. Do you remember Jim O'Brien, the Irish guy? He was. No. We were talking about Goombas, and I was one of his pallbearers at his funeral. And he was a lovely bloke, and he got him somehow. When the Iron Curtain was still down, he managed to get a British select team to go over and fight in Czechoslovakia. But but he came back and told me these stories about it, and I was like, and it just sounded like mad, like secret police coming in, raiding bars and all of that. All of that. And then obviously when I moved to Germany, it's like I thought that was all nonsense until I realised that nearly everybody I worked with used to be on the payroll of the Stasi, and I was like, yeah, that's real stuff, But it was when it came up, and I was like, Czechoslovakia, and I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't look anything like what these Cov lads are telling me. Like this looks like it looks beautiful. But you just said something, and where you're on about the shop window of karate and what people thought about it at the time. It was one of the things that always stood out with me. It was like everyone else was talking about how they were going to be movers and shakers, and we're going to get this, because at that time it was, we're bringing it to the next level. We need to do, we've got all these people doing it. And I'm not buttering you up, but Steve, you're literally one of the only people I saw that used to actually travel the world, getting paid to teach the art. In that era, because no one else was doing it. Was there a language barrier problem, or so how did you get around that?
Luckily, Andra spoke English really well, so he did all the translations for me. I just had to learn to speak clearly, not to use Cockney, and speaking words that I knew were translatable.
So what drew you to something which was the biggest martial art in the world, well, still is really, I think, karate, to go into the, don't want to say esoteric, but the more niche areas of martial art? Why did you
obviously,
go down that route?
as I said, the thing that drew me to Tai Chi was David Carradine, the Shaolin Temple, and so on. And I knew that Tai Chi was opposite to everything that I was doing, or I thought it was at the time. I wouldn't say that now. The Iaido, I think, it's a Zen art, and it was a traditional Japanese. Although I was training with Toru Takamizawa, Toru was a university graduate. He came from a samurai family, but he'd gone to kind of university, and then as a youngster came straight over here. Okumitsu Fuji had trained in Kendo and Iaido since he was 5 years old, just after the Second World War on the streets in Japan. He trained at the Miyamoto Musashi Shrine Dojo. He had such an excellent Budo background that, another thing to understand is that I've always taken private lessons with all my instructors. So nearly all my instruction's been private. And so I'd go and get Fuji out of bed every Tuesday morning because he'd like to drink at night. And I'd drag him down to the Irishman's Club across the road from his house, and he'd give me a private lesson there. And I think he didn't know how much he knew, and it took me to draw a lot out of him. So I'd ask a million questions, but particularly about Japanese culture, Budo, the translations of words, and so on. So I got so much from Fuji that I could never have got even from any other Japanese instructor. He was an absolute wealth of information, and a great guy and a very good friend. Used to go around his house for dinner and everything.
I was always interested in Japan, but it's only when you go there or you meet a true Japanese person that you realise, you go, we are so different. And the bits that I really admire, I really, really admire. Because as you were saying, I get him up in the morning, he's had a few beers the night before, take him to an Irish bar. And I'm thinking there's a punchline coming here in a minute, you know what I mean? And then I'm like, yeah, but most of my Japanese friends are exactly the same. You go to it, and then when it's time to drink, it's time to drink. When it's time to work, it's time to work. But it was the just as you were saying it, I'm thinking, isn't this really strange? Because normally the student-teacher dynamic, there's the hierarchy going on, but when you've got that in a one-to-one. But I don't know if you might agree with me on this. I always think that when you do a one-to-one, it's more of an elective hierarchy. It's not like going into a class and jumping in there, another 30 guys in, and you're like, oh man, I'm just jumping in with these guys. Yeah, I'm just another sheep. Yeah. Whereas I think
it's the way you learn. I learn much better by asking questions. So like you have 100 questions in my mind. So for 15 years, I went to Birmingham every single week from Kent to train with Toru. And eventually moved him down to me. But we became friends. Toru was a very odd character, but we got on extremely well. And by asking questions and talking, I could learn so much more from him. Fuji was like a 13th century samurai warrior born out of his age, he literally was that kind of way. But But he knew so much about Budo that even when I'd be doing a seminar with Toru would draw something in Japanese on a board, and he'd say something like Metsuka, and then he'd see me standing there and he'd go, Steve, what do you know about Metsuka? Because he knows I would have learned from Fuji. So my understanding of Japanese words, of Budo, of Japanese culture, and so on, I got a lot from them. The funny thing is that the Japanese are very strange in the sense that, certainly Toru and Fuji were no good with money. They never wanted to talk about money. I used to just put stuff in a red envelope and put it in their bag, and we never discussed the money at all. I used to sort it out for them. With Fuji, he'd run out of money. I had to pay to bring his instructors over. I helped him by buying a load of his books and selling them for him. I wrote 2 books with Toru Takamizawa, had them printed and sold them to get him money as well. So they were both absolutely useless with cash, with money, but they were well worth training with, well worth learning, well worth putting myself out for them. When I went to Hong Kong, Chinese are the opposite. So Chinese are all money, and everything's money, and they tend to not treat you very well. And you've got to put the money in a red envelope. It's got to be brand new notes, unmarked, straight from the bank, exorbitant money normally, and you would give it to them with both hands in the red envelope. They'd take the cash out of the envelope and count it in front of you.
Yeah.
So everything. So the difference between the Japanese and the Chinese, in my experience, really was quite profound. And in Hong Kong, everything was just about money. Everything.
Yeah, but you see this. Yeah, but you see this thing. I know that's like we could go down the right geopolitical route where 2 worlds collide and all of that, and then the British influence and like the fighting over it because it was such a hub. But when you were saying it about Fuji, especially, it's like I've got a few friends who are a bit like that, and they're bad with money. But what it is that it's not like they're not frivolous with money. They just see money. They see money as a trifle. When I look at them, it's like, and I don't mean trifle to drink, to eat. Like it's just like, why would I be interested in it? I've got bigger things to worry about than a piece of paper with the king or the queen's head on it. And it was like you were saying, the minute you said he was a man out of his time, I'm like, yeah, I know a few guys like that where it's like I'm not going to get involved with these ludicrous ideas. You'll know this as we're all getting older, Steve. Now, like, you couldn't pay me to watch TikTok. You couldn't pay me. Like, don't get me wrong. I like Facebook because I like to be argumentative and I like to question people. But that's just like an old guy. I'm a bit like Don Quixote. You know what I mean? Tilted at windmills and arguing with people that aren't even really there. You know what I mean? But it's as you get older, you realise that.
The thing is,
that.
I'm the same. I've never. The one thing that I've always understood is you need to pay your bills. Live humbly, So I've never lived exorbitantly. I've got a small flat over the top of my dojo that I live in. I drive just a normal, type car. I've never been on holiday hardly at all ever. I'm vegan. I don't smoke. I don't drink. So I paid off my mortgage 15, 20 years ago on both the dojo and my flat. So I don't owe any money, but I have always lived very humbly. And what I do, I don't talk about money. I put money up front with students. They only ever pay me by direct debit. So we sort out the money right at the start, and then we just never talk about it again. And that way, I think that works.
Well, it's funny you said that because it was when I was looking at getting a full-time academy, Neil Simpkin was like, so Neil speaks so highly of you. He if you don't mind me asking, just it's me being like nosy, how many years did Neil travel down to you from Birmingham to train?
A lot. I can't remember how many. But
yeah.
I used to have a club down in Swanley. He was a kid when he first came down.
Yeah. Well, you see, again, it's another man who was born out of his time. But it was like Neil said to me, he goes, only person I know who's really smart when it comes to teaching martial arts, he goes, Steve Rowe. And I went, really? He goes, yeah, he lives above his dojo. He goes, he doesn't have 2 mortgages. He goes, And you go, he's got the fastest commute in the world ever. You know what I mean? He goes downstairs. Now, this is going to lead me on to how I actually got to meet you. I met you through that scoundrel and that rascal Pillage, right? And if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you, because I'm going to quickly preface it with this. I met Pillage because he rang me up to see if I'd teach some Thai boxing for him. I went down there, spoke to him. Within about 15 minutes, I liked him. Within 20 minutes, I had to turn around and say, listen, me and you were going to get on really well. But if you can just knock off all of that BS that you're coming out with right now, keep it for the marks who'll pay, right? For the guys who really want to do it. Because I always used to say about Pillage, he should have been a carnival barker. Yeah, because again, Steve, the thing is, me and you know we know a pre-cancer Tony Pillage. And when, like, he's one of the only people I know that as a person became a much better person by being tested by cancer. Yeah, because I know loads of guys go, oh, he's great. And I went, you never met him? When I met him, and they were like, what? And I said, within 20 minutes, I had to say to him, Tony, me and you will be friends for life. And there's two things. First of all, we'll never, ever be in business together. And secondly, knock off some of that crazy shizzle that you're coming out with. Because if it worked, guess what? They'd be doing it in the UFC, or they'd be doing it. Yeah, they'd be doing it. The SWAT guys would be doing it. So how did you meet him?
I know Tony from his GKR days.
No way! When he was a green belt and told everyone. I don't know how he got away with that.
It kind of got out of that, and he wanted to meet Chris Rowing because he'd had a lesson with Chris Rowing. And so he phoned me up. So I probably know him longer than almost anybody else in martial arts.
Yeah.
And we kind of became friends. And I liked him because he was a large character. I suppose in a way, you could say there was pre-Jesus Tony and post-Jesus Tony.
Yeah.
Before he kind of became the prophet as such. But he's always been a good friend. And he, when I had both of my knees replaced and I was in a wheelchair, he'd drive all the way down from Coventry, pick me up. He bought us some tickets for the Who concert and took me to the Who concert, pushing me around in the wheelchair, which he absolutely loved, dancing next to me in the wheelchair. We went to see the Dalai Lama together. We went to Scotland together for seminars. We went to tattoo conventions, and so it was just we were friends. And Tony, I probably did the same to you. Tony would phone me up every day from the bath. You'd always hear him gurgling in the bath. He'd ring you up, and he'd just ring you up to talk. But only friends do that.
Yeah, well, you see, it's funny you say this, because just as you were saying this, like, I always liked him, always, right? And the first time I ever met him, he had got Chuck Liddell over to do a seminar at the Body Power, and he didn't even have any focus mitts. So he was charging all these people money, saw me, recognized me, and he says, oh, come on in, jump on in. And I was like, yeah. And then he was like, oh, it's 15 quid. And I went, oh, no, I'll let it go, mate. And he was like, oh, well, in that case, come on in. But the thing is with Pillage, I got quickly tell you two stories. First one, this was when he was riddled with cancer, right? We went to see Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, the musical, and he'd managed to somehow purloin his tickets somehow, right? And we went to see it at the theatre in Birmingham, and I went to the toilet, and as I went to the toilet, I left him there, and he was in pretty rough shape at this stage. And I came back, and it was a matinee show. I should have mentioned that at the start. So it was all Darby and Joan characters who were all that. And I come back, and there's these old women tutting away at me. And I'm like, you're right, Tone, do you want an ice cream? And he's, and he was like really like milking it. Oh, and I said to him, and he, because he looked bad, you believe him. He go, oh, no. And then this woman said, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I went, what are you on about? And she went, you should be ashamed of yourself. You and him have been married for the last 15 years and you're embarrassed to be out with him. And the thing was, I was like this going immediately. I'm like, Tony, please say that you've got stage 4 cancer. Don't say you've got AIDS, because that's going to make it look even worse. And then he goes, oh yeah, told him I had AIDS. And you're like, oh God. So that was it. I went back, told my wife, she couldn't believe that. And my wife actually liked Tony, because she used to say, I don't really like many people in martial arts because they're dead weird. But I actually like Tony because he's like weird and then another level of weirdness. And then the second time we went to see Wilco Johnson. And we go, and this stage, Tony is done. He is like that. Yeah, we were there, and he was already talking about he didn't have long to live. And I ended up, I had to, like, Tony is really funny because Tony was telling everyone that he foot swept 2 people because guys were bumping into him, and we were in this roped off area, and we'd already been in, spent 2 hours with Wilco, had a great crack, and that was an experience all on its own. And this guy bumped in, and I said, "Look, leave it out, mate. The guy's got cancer." And this guy says, "You what?" He goes, "Screw it." So I was like, "What?" So I spun him round, put him in a rear naked choke, dragged him out, came back, and Pillage was tripping people over because they were starting trouble. And he was putting his foot out, tripping them over. And then he told everyone that they were foot sweeps. And I was like, no, you've just tripped them up. And and the thing was, he was tripping them up quicker than I could drag them out. Because as soon as he hit the deck, I had to pull them out. But as like you were saying, the thing is with Pillage, he was a polarizing character, but all of the fun stuff I had with him had nothing to do with martial arts. You know,
That's
it was
right,
just pretending to be his life partner. You know what I mean? Or, you know, at Wilco Johnson. So I hope you don't mind. That was a pretty sort of ham-fisted way for me to get into what you're going through now.
I actually took him to Czech on the summer course. He asked to come. And I put him in a room with one of my third dans, and I said to the third dan, "Tony's a lazy bastard. So make sure he comes out doing the 7 o'clock in the morning training sessions, get him up, get him out." And my friend did. And if you'd seen Tony get dragged out every morning to do his training, it's absolutely hilarious. We had some really funny times there. But yeah, I liked Tony. He was a good friend. And I've got the biggest respect for Sarah. I think, you know, Sarah stuck by him through thick and thin.
Yeah,
and,
she did. Yeah, because I wouldn't say he was the easiest guy to live with. You know what I mean? Because he was amusing character, but that's it. Yeah, so that's because the last time I saw you was at Tony's funeral, and I don't know how well your health was then. But it was because I had to take a second. I had to take a second look at you. I don't know if you remember, because I had to take a second look. And that this is a bit where, when you do a podcast, the great thing about doing podcasts is, Steve, that I get to ask questions that, in polite conversation, I couldn't ask for myself. You know, because I say, well, the people who are watching this would be interested in stuff. But yeah, I've been following you on, because again, there's pluses and minuses to social media. If it's nonsense, I can't live with it. But what you've been going through, and you've documented it, and you've been really real about it. You know, first of all, nothing short of inspiring, first of all. And I do mean that. That's not BS either. But if you don't mind me asking, how has your training helped you? And, you know, going from this vital, like, robust individual to having everything tested, you know, can you explain what you've done?
Let me try and put it in a nutshell, because otherwise it'd be too long a story. I've had 25 surgeries. I've had 3 life-threatening sepsis infections, and one of the worst ones was in 2015 when I collapsed coming back from the Czech Republic. Was rushed. It took them an hour to get me into the ambulance because I was having a heart attack and everything at the same time. It was a really bad sepsis infection. And after a couple of surgeries there, I knew they were actually killing me, and they were trying to prep me for a 3rd surgery. So I managed to get a booking for a private surgeon up here, but I couldn't get an ambulance to transport me because it had to be with all the tubes in. I couldn't even get a private ambulance to support me. In the end, I had to discharge myself, ripped all the tubes out, phoned Will Henshaw, thank you, Will, and Will came up and got me and took me up. And well, to tell you, I was at death's door at the time, and I was in the private hospital for 5 months. They took my knee away. They put an antibiotic spacer in. Eventually, they fused my leg straight. But my 3rd sepsis infection was when they had to amputate my leg. The bar that was going through my leg had come up through the bone. My leg was awful. It was huge. So they rushed me in. They blue lighted me in then, and they amputated my leg. That was in 2021. I came out from that, been through the rehab. I was just having the final kind of blood tests for infection when they found cancer. And that was when, therefore, I then had to go through the whole prostate cancer thing. I don't have to talk that much about that because you had Gavin on last time, and Gavin, I think, explained it all extremely well.
Yeah.
But leading on from that, I can talk about what it's done for me. But there was four of us, four senior martial artists. We all had the same Gleason score for cancer. That was myself, Gavin Mulholland, Paul Coleman, and Tony Childs. And so we formed a little message group in Messenger where we would talk to each other. And of course, unfortunately, Tony died. He had his prostate removed and had a blood clot, so he died. But that was why I decided to do the seminars for Gavin Mulholland and Paul Coleman, which you've probably seen up on Facebook. They were all fully booked within days. I've got 60 people on each course. So really looking for, I'm amazed that anyone wants to learn from a one-legged 72-year-old guy falling to pieces. But, you know, they're fully booked. So that's brilliant. And I'm really looking forward to those. Going back to the 2015 one, when everybody thought I was dying then. And I did, while I was in hospital, I did 52 days of meditation. And at the end of each meditation, I wrote a poem. And that's the book that I published was going to be my legacy as such, because I thought I was dying. So each poem I wrote down, I published a book on my iPhone in hospital through Amazon, through Lulu and onto Amazon. I did it all on my phone. And I thought that was going to be the end. But anyway, I survived. And Gavin King said to me at the time, why don't you do a coaching program for Tai Chi? Which made me set up the coaching programs that I started to run. And the thing there was that I set those up. The first one was in 2018, and I've done one every year since. That's 5 years I've been running these coaching programs. And the great thing about those coaching programs is that they're all other martial artists, all senior martial artists. So I've put through now about somewhere between 80 and 100 people that are in the martial arts, most of them already 5th, 6th dans in karate, Wing Chun, Kung Fu, all the different martial arts.
If you don't mind me saying, Jeet Kune Do and Kali, I'll be remiss of me not to mention Aaron Davis, one of my teachers. Yeah. That was a surprise because Aaron popped up and I was like, I didn't even know you knew Steve. I didn't know you were interested in Tai Chi. He goes, more to me than meets the eye, son. But yeah, it's so tell me, sorry to interrupt, but I had to get Aaron in there.
My point is that what I've been able to do, I think one of the things that I'm very good at is structuring. So when it comes to coaching, I'm very good at putting together a structure of learning. And it's the way to simplify without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You need the depth, but I use a whole kind of process of like keywords and so on that we work through. But I don't think there is any different. In the end, there's no difference whether it's Tai Chi, karate, Jeet Kune Do, whatever it is. Everyone's got an inside and an outside. You know, so when you talk about internal and external, I mean, originally internal and external simply meant whether it was inside the Shaolin Temple or outside, but it gradually became to mean the difference between sort of soft and hard. But actually, through the Tai Chi, I teach the internal that you can apply to all of the other martial arts. So it's improved people's, you know, Kali, karate, Kung Fu, Wing Chun. Everyone said it's made such a difference. So learning the kind of how to use your spine, your core, to manipulate it to get internal power, what chi actually, other than Gavin saying last time, you know, about, you know, there is something to chi. Of course, there's chi's, everything is actually perfectly explainable. It's scientific, it's biological. It's not that difficult to understand. It's just that people tend to put a kind of salesman's haze over it all. But I can explain it. And the great thing there is I've been able to put it into all of their martial arts. So Tai Chi's become a lovely kind of core art that they can still do whatever it was they was doing, but they can add something to it on the inside. And that's been really helpful, been useful.
Well, you see, the thing is, Steve, as you were saying this, you know, without sounding too esoteric, it brings me right back to the beginning when you were saying you were there and you were doing karate first, boom, boom, boom. And then to go and slow everything down, be in the back garden, doing these movements. And like, it's funny, I was just at jiu-jitsu this morning. I was rolling with this guy and he's scrambling around, he's going crazy. And I went, "You're really good, man. You're really fast." And I was like, "That's some fast shit you're doing there." And he went, "Oh, thanks. I went, no, it's just shit done really fast, mate." And then he started laughing and I was like, "Mate, as I've got older, I've realised it's slow it down." My main teacher in the UK, Terry Barnett, used to always say, if you slow it down, first of all, you have to be in the moment all the way through. There's no start and stop, there just is, right? And then he said, and the other one as well is, when it's not right. And that's like with Tai Chi, 2023, one of my things that I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and see you, because good enough for Aaron Davis, good enough for me, right? But it's that time of your life where I'm going, maybe there's a reason why I can't do it fast anymore. Maybe I'm being told. My body's saying to me, no.
I'm quite aware of how our time runs out very quickly.
Yeah.
Something that I just love to add in. Someone said to me, if you could pick any instructor, living or dead, to train under, who would you pick? And I said, me. And they said, "Well, that's a bit arrogant, isn't it?" And I said, "No, because I became the instructor that I always wanted. I was always looking for me, but I never found me. So I went to lots of different places, lots of different instructors, and I got little bits and pieces. And I've got to say, a lot of my knowledge came from outside of martial arts, because I studied Buddhism for 50 years. I studied mindfulness, I studied meditation. These are the keys to everything I teach. Mindfulness, which is what you was just saying, really. Mindfulness, the art of paying attention, is really the most important thing. And sort of harking back to the thing that you nearly touched earlier, how did my training help me when I went through all these really bad times? It was mindfulness and meditation, because I was able to observe objectively what I was going through subjectively. I could observe my pain, I could observe my suffering, I could observe my anxiety, my angst, my fear. I could observe it objectively because of my mindfulness, because of my meditation. And that, without a doubt, Buddhism saved my life.
You see, again, like I'm a lapsed Irish Catholic, right? And I always tell people, I always try and walk the Eightfold Path. Not always works for me, but at least I'm aware of it, you know what I mean? And it's that whole thing that, you're only truly ignorant when you don't realize how ignorant you are, And it's, as you were saying about it's almost, I remember I've only ever had it a couple of times in martial arts where it's felt like an out-of-body experience, where I'm on the outside looking at me, but knowing I'm still on the inside. And I don't want to sound like a really awful Joe Rogan and say it was DMT or anything. It wasn't. It was a moment of, for want of a better word, pure clarity and nirvana, where I was there and I was like, man, it's like the end of Highlander, where you go, I am everything, I know everything. And you don't have to chop off people's heads to get that nirvana in martial arts, you know what I mean? But it was the Buddhism thing, 50 years studying Buddhism, right? So my mathematics tells me that a 22-year-old lad from South London, I don't know, man, how did you get into Buddhism?
Well, again, it comes back to when Kung Fu first came on the telly, was at that time. So the whole David Carradine thing was the thing that attracted me to it. And like I say, I think I always had this deep thing that I was interested in Oriental philosophy and intrigued, because even Japanese writing, as I said earlier, the calligraphy, the fact that you draw pictures instead of words appealed to my way of thinking, because it presents a whole thing. And so the whole thing with the Buddhist monasteries and the Buddhism and so on, that really intrigued me. And I was very lucky in that I started to study Theravadan Buddhism. And I was going to the Chithurst Monastery. Do you remember Nathan Johnson? He wrote loads of books on martial arts. He wrote Barefoot Zen, Zen Shorindo Karate.
Yes.
He was a Wing Chun guy down in Southampton. But I used to train with him a lot. He was quite a good friend as well. And he introduced me to Chithurst Monastery. He took me down there, and I got one of the Asians to come over to my summer course in, I think, Brighton to give lectures. And then I started buying every lecture tape from Amaravati Monastery and listening to those, and all the books that they supply from there. I started reading all those. So that was how I got into it. And it's something that I could relate to. I think the thing that I could relate to most was because I can simplify things. I can bring things down to their ethos and their principal ideas that kind of pervade everything. Same with any martial art idea or principle. And that's exactly what Buddhism does. And the Buddha, I think when he became enlightened, he didn't just teach princes and people from the higher castes in India. He had to teach people that couldn't read or write. And I think he was really clever, because he must have looked at it and thought the one thing that everybody's got in common is that we all suffer. So if you can understand suffering and an enlightenment from the suffering, so his Four Noble Truths, people pass them by very quickly. Oh yeah, there is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, blah, 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 Eightfold Path. But they don't realize how deep all of those Four Noble Truths actually go. They are the essence of Buddhism, but they pervade absolutely everything.
Well, it's funny you're saying this, because as you're just saying, this is why I love doing this, because it's just as you're having a conversation, it's almost like organic. It's like you were saying. There's two things. First of all, really dear friend of mine, John Will. If you haven't met him, I'd love you to meet him. He's in my top 3 teachers of all time, and his whole thing is there's two types of things you've got to realize. Because first of all, everyone wants to understand stuff and have a broad understanding. He said, but you need to have the deep understanding as well. And he's a great man when it comes to, like, again, he'll say he's neurodivergent as well. And he'll turn around and he'll say, he goes, if you can boil it down to its essence, he goes, there's these inevitable truths in everything. So when you were just talking there about suffering, it's like, I've had a little bit of this in my life where, I was dead lucky. I got to 48 before anyone that I was close to passed away. Right. And up until that point, I was like, I always knew in the back of my head that, I would fold, because, you'll know this, Steve, right? Especially what you've gone through. It's dead easy to be tough when you've never been tested. You know what I mean? It's it's like that. It's like, I'm double tough. And you go, you haven't been tested yet, son. The minute you've been tested, you'll find out, right? And one of the things that got me was my father passed away, and I'm Irish and Catholic. We had a dodgy relationship at the start, because I lived in 16 years of abject terror of him, right? And then obviously it was only when my son was born, I looked at my son and I went, at one point my dad had to look at me like this. So that, like, he didn't change, I changed, right? But then when he passed away, it got me. And what got me through that was the 5 stages of grief, which, as you were saying, people walk past it immediately. And it's only when you're in there, you go, no, it has to be. If I want acceptance, I have to go through everything first. I have to go through anger, have to go through denial, have to do everything. And it was like, just as you were saying it, it's like, it makes me think about everything that when it comes to martial arts, but then that's everything in life. If you haven't got that core principle straight, you'll know this. Like, the most disappointing thing you'll ever find, especially in the martial arts world, is when you meet people who are just amazingly good physically, and then you spend 5 minutes conversation with them, and you go, "Man, you're like the biggest douchebag I've ever met in my." And sorry, don't want to get demonetized there, but a bit where you go, "How the fuck have you got this far and not picked up any of that?" And again, this shows me. This is how unenlightened I am. I'm like, dude, I've suffered for this art, and I don't get to do the armbar like you do, mate. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. But again, that shows it. So I'm 54 next month, but I still believe in my head that I'm only about 28, maybe 29. But so with the Buddhism, right? You don't mind it, and this is totally indulging me. As I said, when I saw you at Pillager's funeral, I had to do a double take, and it was really funny because we'd met a couple of times, and you were always super gracious with me, and I really mean that. And then I saw you, but it was the first time I saw you, and it was, believe it or not, you're probably one of the first people I ever met that I looked at you, and I knew it was you, but you didn't look like the you that was in my brain. Does that make sense? Because you weren't looking good at the time, right? And then as you were talking about the surgeries, you'd only put on Facebook there only a couple of days ago, you'd mentioned it. And then I remember the picture of your leg. And I remember seeing that. And I was at jiu-jitsu with Neil Simpkin. And I said to Neil, are you following Steve? Have you seen this? Showed it, right? And this whole big thing is coming to the point of, having a leg amputated is a huge thing, right? And for a person like yourself who has this, and I'm not buttering you up, but it's just who you are, right? For a person who has such a massive understanding of who you are as a person on an intrinsic level, mind, body, spirit, the whole lot. And I'm being indulgent here for me, because I just want to know your thought process. What's it like having that removed?
I think at the time I was in such a bad state of sepsis that I'd accepted that it had to come off, and that I'd have to deal with whatever it was afterwards. I really wouldn't want to go through it. It's horrible. It's nasty. It's dirty. The drains, the scars, and all that. Think of what Gavin was talking about. It's in a similar vein. And I'm still recovering from it now, and I still find it hard to accept now. So acceptance is something I counsel a lot of people privately, not for money, but they just message me all the time, people. And there's a couple of people at the moment going through a really hard time, and saying that they're angry and they can't accept these things. And my answer to them is that you have to understand acceptance. You can't hang on to a thought. It's impossible. Thoughts just come and go. But what happens is you keep hurting yourself. You keep reproducing that thought again and again and again. But actually, when you're angry, you become that anger. And that's why you've got to be able to separate yourself from it, to be able to look at it and examine it. But you have to let it in. Don't try and push it away. You have to let it in. And then you've got to look at it, examine it. Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this angry? Why do I feel so anxious? Why do I feel, why have I got these feelings? But you can look at it objectively, and you're observing the feeling rather than being that feeling. But you have to let it in. You've got to examine it. You've got to go through that process, and it takes as long as it takes. And there's a saying, keep both doors open, because thoughts come and go. So it'll come in. You're going to have to deal with it, and then it'll go. And, this story, I've put it up fairly recently about the Buddha and the two arrows. The Buddha said there are two arrows of suffering. The first one is the suffering in life that you can do nothing about. All the time you're in this meat carcass, you're going to have suffering. It's why you're here. So you've got suffering you can't avoid. But then the second arrow is the suffering you can avoid, and that is don't suffer about your suffering. Don't be angry about your anger. Don't be sad about your sadness. So you have to let that first level of suffering in, and you've got to accept that. I know I'm never going to be the same again. I'm not going to be the Steve Rowe I was before. That's past. That's gone. I have to accept that. I have to accept that I'm flopping around with a stump on one side, and so on. And there's a million things I'm never going to be able to do again. But that's acceptance. So I have to work through that. And once I can accept it, then I can let it go and just be who I am now. But I dealt with a lot of the pain and suffering because when I'd be doing my Tai Chi laying down in a hospital bed, I've done it sitting on the side of the hospital bed. I've done it in wheelchairs, chairs. So that little bit of Tai Chi and meditation, mindfulness every day always played a very important part in keeping me stable. And that mindfulness, the word mindful means you're observing. You're looking at, you're watching your behavior, you're watching your feelings, you're watching your thoughts. So mindfulness is not something you sit down for 20 minutes and or whatever it is to be mindful. Yeah. Mindfulness is something that you do all the time, all day. I draw a line in my mind, and all the time I'm being mindful, I'm in the pluses. When I'm not mindful, I'm in the minuses. And at the end of each day, I ask myself if I ended up in the pluses or the minuses.
Yeah.
So mindfulness is something you have to work to maintain. And what I did through all the pain and the agony and the angst and the suffering and the anxiety attacks. And of course, the other thing is, is drugs. Drugs that you take for pain and so on, they create a lot of anxiety. Even for the cancer stuff, what do they call it? The hormone blocking drugs and that, they give you anxiety and so on as well. You could burst into tears, and you're looking at it and you're going, why do I've never felt like this in my life. Yeah. Why do I feel like this? But at least you can watch it and observe it. So I spent a lot of time saying, this is not who I am. I know what I am.
Yeah, you see, again, it's like, there's been a couple of times, I said it to Gavin, it was when Gavin was on about the Tallygate tattoo that he's going to have, and he was on the 5th day and the 19th day. And I only re-listened to that yesterday. Again, I've listened to it about 5 times because it's been so profound to me. And it was like those moments where it was like, but I've been strong, I've been strong. And it's like that classic, where it's the 2 footprints in the sand, and it's, well, that's the point where I carried you. And you look at it and you go, yeah, the reason I'm saying all this is, as kids, we're never told this. Your parents will tell you, like, they lie to you about Santa Claus, and they should tell you the truth. Life's gonna suck, and the older you get, it's gonna suck more. If you're lucky, guess what? You're just gonna lose people close to you, but that's all part and parcel of life. But that's the lucky part. When you're doing the suffering part, and again, it's like you were saying about the anxiety. I've only ever had anxiety once in my life, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And it was medically related. My left arm went numb, and I was like, oh, shit, man. I'm that guy who's trained all his life, and I'll be like the cautionary tale in Witherspoons to guys drinking beer. And they'll be like, you see that Mick Tully trained his whole life? Oh, he should have just drank 15 pints a day and smoked 20 fags. Yeah, who's the mug? All of that. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I just don't feel me. You know what I mean? And like
exactly.
with Gavin, when I spoke to him, it was there. And then with you, I don't know if you remember, there was a period there just after you'd had your surgery on your leg, you had the amputation. And it was, and I really mean this, like, even though you were suffering through it, that some of the thoughts that you made me deal with, because I don't know if you remember, you had maybe about a week where you were talking about phantom.
Phantom pain,
yeah, and what that did was, it was bizarre for me, because I'm going like this, like, as I said, Steve, I've pretty much read everything you've ever written, right? And I mean that, right? And of course, one of the things that drove me to always following your stuff was when everyone else was doing look at my round kick and my washigari karate, this is what it's all about. And then you were coming out with some real Zen level shit, and I was like, that's the sort of stuff I want to listen to. And then when you did it, I was, first of all, I've known for years how mentally and physically strong you are. As Neil Simpkin always used to say, he goes, don't let anyone ever think, like, if anyone thinks that Steve Rowe's just a bit of Tai Chi, mate, he goes, that guy can kick your ass, mate, for real. And he used to say that about you all the time. But when you said about the phantom pain, I was like, this is a really smart guy who knows that the pain isn't there, because physically it isn't there. So what's going on with his brain chemistry to make him do this? And how do you contact? And as you would, like, I'm not saying that you've totally dealt with it or anything, but the way you were dealing with that online, and I was following it. And if you don't mind, because that's literally something that has fascinated me, because how do you get around the leg's not there anymore? So how do you do it?
I still get it.
Right.
I still get phantom pain. I still get it, and quite badly at times as well. But originally they gave me pregabalin, which is a gabapentin type, a modern gabapentin drug, to help with it, which was actually very helpful. But that made me really ill. The pregabalin made me ill. It made me permanent kind of chest infections. My iron levels dropped down. I became anemic and so on. So in the end, it took me ages to get off the pregabalin as well, because it was a very, very addictive drug for me. But I still have to deal with that now. But let me just say, because I think one of the things that will help everyone is to just understand this idea of how you deal with pain, how you deal with anxiety and so on. It's so simple, and everybody tends to complicate it. Simple doesn't mean easy, but to understand it is quite simple, right? And when you breathe deeply, your body calms down, right? And to help you to breathe deeply, you need good posture. So the basic structure is, however you do it, standing, sitting, laying down, whatever, it doesn't matter. But good posture and deep breathing will calm the body down. And when the body calms down, the emotions calm down. And when the emotions calm down, the mind calms down. It's a very simple process. And you can do it doing Tai Chi, you can do it sitting down and meditating, you can do it anything. But mindfulness is the fact that you want to get past the thinking mind. And the thing that clouds the thinking mind is emotions and anxiety and anger and so on. So what you do to get around that is very, very simple. If you sit straight, breathe deep, and you just wait until you will, in the end, you will feel, your mind will play endless tricks with you, but that's okay. Because like I said, thoughts come and go. So you just let them in. You know, if you, people often say to me, I can't, you know, I can't stop thinking. And I go, that's okay. Because when you start breathing deep and you just sit and wait, it has to calm down. There's nothing else for it to do. You can't hang on to a thought. They'll just let them come. They'll just keep coming. Let your anger come up. Let your emotions come up. It doesn't matter, because it'll all pass away. But what you've got to do is you've just simply got to wait it out. And the key to it is deep breathing, good deep breathing. And when you breathe deep, your body calms down, your emotions will calm down, your mind calms down. And it's a little bit like the heart monitor, you know, where it goes beep, 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 and then it goes beep, beep, beep. And when it flatlines and it goes beep, it means that you're not thinking anymore. And when you're not thinking, it's when you're in a mindful state. And that's where insight and wisdom will come up. That's when it'll arise. So you'll become an insightful person and a wise person from that part of your brain, but you've got to access it. But it's one of those simple things that, and this Sanshin course that I'm doing in January for Paul Coleman, for his cancer treatment, we're going to do Sanshin. And of course, Sanshin is 3 battles. And so therefore, it's the resolution of the battle of 3. You know, so you've got to start with mind, body, and breath. You've got to harmonize them. And when you can harmonize mind, body, and breath, you know, then you can harmonize your body, your breath, your emotions, and then eventually your thoughts. So everything, those 3 battles are resolved to become one thing. And that is a mindful state. And my point with any martial art is the learning process. Most people can't learn. You go into a seminar and watch people, and within seconds, their mind, the 2 enemies of the mind is laziness and distraction. And watch how those 2 enemies upset everybody, and no one has an attention span that goes more than 20 seconds or 30 seconds. So when you can prolong that, when you can be mindful and maintain your attention, you can learn so much more. So I start all my coaching programs here by training people how to learn. So we start with a little bit of mindfulness and meditation and deep breathing. So it's posture, breathing, learning, you know, how to stand properly, how to sit properly, and so on. It's just simply so that people can learn, so that they can actually pay attention. But you watch them doing a Tai Chi form, within the time they've done 10 moves, you can tell their mind's either wandered off somewhere or it's just gone dull. Yeah. So sorry, rambling on a bit, but the qualities of the mind are awareness, focus, sensitivity, and intensity. And you must have all 4. So awareness is just actually being there, being aware and being present. But that's like a light. It can shine out everywhere. You need to focus it into like a torch beam. So awareness and focus, when you can focus it, you need sensitivity to yourself, your own body, your own emotions, your own thoughts, and those of others and your environment as well. And finally, the guardian of it all is intensity. And that's the bit that most people miss, because a lot of people do Tai Chi or meditation and they're off with the fairies. They're like, you know, and it's the opposite. It's like standing with your toes curling over the edge of a cliff and looking into the abyss. You've got to be really, really intense. Your arousal, actually, when you meditate, your level of arousal has got to be really high, but in a good way, not in a bad way.
You know what, Steve? I'm I want to wrap it up for one reason only. To finish on that is just perfect. But the only thing I'm going to say is, you mentioned, first of all, like earlier on, you were on about, I didn't get any qualifications at school. Dude, you're one of the most insightful people I've ever met. Secondly, the other thing, as you were saying it was dead funny, because I'm like, wait a minute, trust me, even in your state at the moment, I wouldn't want to mess with you, Steve, because the simple reason you're turning around and saying, who wants to learn from a guy with one leg in a wheelchair, mate? I'll tell you right now, anybody with half a brain listens to the last thing that you just said, because as you're doing it, my brain is firing in every single direction. What problems do I have with kids? Two things: laziness straight away, and then they've got no attention span. And it's like, those two together, you're never going to get any work. And then it's like, again, nowadays we label it with everything, where I think we could get so much more from everybody, from, like, as you were saying, it's mindfulness isn't going homina, homina, homina. Mindfulness is knowing who you are at the right time, all the time.
Exactly.
And that's a lifetime pursuit, man. But mate, I tell you what, some of the stuff you were saying, like, I was making notes on my phone here, because I'm like, shit, I gotta look at this, because at the moment with me, a lot of the stuff I'm doing at the moment is, there's a couple of really hot. There's a guy called Huberman. I don't know if you've seen him. He's a neuroscientist. I'll send you a couple of links. So it's the physiology of the brain, and working all the way down into the limbic region, and he's bringing it all within martial arts as well.
Right.
But it's so fascinating, because we know the human brain's like the ocean, man. It's so much of it's uncharted, and it is crazy. It was like where you were just saying there about the doing Sanshin, and you got 3 battles all at once. And I'm thinking, when I was doing Sanshin Kata, all I was doing was tucking my balls up into my chest and doing a lot of breathing. And I know that sounds, but it was the truth. That's how I was taught it. And it was like, no. And then after a while, I remember going, oh man, and it wasn't the fact that I was, this is me personally. I was having to grip the floor, as you were saying it. This will freak you out. I was standing on the cliff, but unfortunately, it was in a church hall in Hillfields in Coventry. But I was gripping the floor, which you have to do in Sanshin Kata. I had to, as I said, pull my balls up, which I just thought I was trying to work on my posture. But then afterwards, it's like, right, yeah. And then everything, because it was so slow, it was like I had to understand it all. And it was like dynamic tension and everything. And it's like, believe it or not, it's one of the only, that and Kushenko are the only 2 katas I still do. Kushenko, I do it because that pretty much has every single other Pinan kata in there that I needed to learn. And it's funny how kata brings you back round, right?
I'm going to teach the opposite in Sanshin. So there's a lot of Goju people on the course, but I'm going to teach the yin yang, the Chinese version of yin, understanding the yin energy and the yang energy in the body, but also how internal energy, how qi or ki comes from being able to manipulate the spine, the core, and the vagus nerve. That's what Sanshin does. Right?
Wow.
So when you look at it, the first donut of cells in the human body is going to be the spine and the brain, and everything grows out from that. When you want real power out from your body, you must use spinal power. The spine doesn't have muscle. It's obviously the core manipulates the spine. And your whole neural system comes from the vagus nerve, because that goes into every internal organ that you've got. So, and a lot of trauma and anxiety comes from vagal trouble or vagus problems. So I'm going to teach a version of Sanshin that would seem so alien to you, but what I'm going to say to these people is it's just the inside of what you're doing. You've got the inside and the outside, so you can do exactly what you do, just use this. Understand, I'll show you how to release your joints, not tighten them. I'll show you how to release the tissue. Don't tighten it, because it needs to be functional. And the spine and the core are the things that will give you energy and power. If you want energy out of your hands and your legs, it's got to come from the spine and the core. If it comes from your shoulders or your arms, it's cheap power. It's what the Chinese call lick. It's like ringing a little bell. Ding, yong, geng. Geng is like thunder, you know.
Man, You're blowing my mind, Steve, with this. I'm telling you. But in a really good...
Your toes shouldn't be gripping the floor, because the arches of your feet are the first pumps of chi. You've got 4 pumps of chi in the body, and the arches of the feet are the first pumps. So when you spiral in your feet, and when you bow the bows of your body, which is the legs, the spine, and the arms, the connected bows, and when you bow them, the arches of your feet will flatten and then come up again. That pump is what pumps the energy around the body. So if you are curling your toes, you're too far forwards in your feet. Thing is, I wouldn't knock what other people do. All I'm doing is say, I'll give you the inside. I'll give you the bit that you haven't got.
Hey, Steve, you know what I mean? It's been a pleasure. What we will do is we'll wrap up on this. So I want you, always should let the gentleman have the final last word, right? And all I'll do is, out of all the years of martial arts that you're doing, I know it's going to be a hard one to answer, right? There's one piece of advice you would give anybody when it comes to martial arts, what would it be?
Yeah. And this is applied to absolutely everything, right? It's a soft front and a strong back. So you always be polite, gentle, careful, soft, always receive even an opponent with softness, but you've got to have the back, you've got to have the spine, you've got to have the power to back it up.
Hey, that's not martial arts, that's life in general, man. Oh man,
soft front and strong back.
Hey, Steve, who would have thought wearing those pajamas years ago would get us to where we are today, mate? You know what I mean? It's unreal.
True.
But hey, honestly, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Great to see you. Great to see you in such good form. And mate, yeah, who wouldn't want to learn from you? And I do mean that. That's it's like you said earlier. But thank you so much, my friend. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Sports Social Podcast Network.